Hey everyone, today we're looking at the Selective Power Rating Test 48. Let's begin. Now, text 1 is called It's All About Me, Robert Doyle, Melbourne's new Lord Mayor. Now, this is an interview, as we can see by all the questions here being in bold and the answers being not in bold. Okay, so it's really just a question-answer format. Let's have a look at this first question just so we can get an example. So we're asking Robert Doyle here, what's one thing most people would be surprised to know about you? And he says, I haven't lived at home since I was 10. Okay, so really all these questions and he's answering them. And I encourage you now to pause the video here, have a read through this whole text. It's really just this one slide, very short. And, well, it's easier than if we go through the questions once you've already read the text. Okay? Now, let's go to question 1. The subject of this interview is what? Robert Doyle, Alison Harding, Melbourne, or none of these? Now, the subject in this question is asking for really the person or thing or whatever it is that is being discussed, or what is the thing being interviewed here. Okay, that's what the subject means in this case. It's not your subject like maths, English, science. It's a subject like who is being interviewed. That's really what it's asking. So your answer would be Robert Doyle. He is the guy that's answering these questions. Okay, so 1, your answer is A. Now, question 2. If Alison Harding is the interviewer, then Robert Doyle is the interview, interviewee, intervene, or the interval. Okay? Now we know Robert Doyle is the person being interviewed, right? So we wouldn't call him the interview because that refers to the whole thing. So this is right. The interviewee is actually the correct term for the person being interviewed. So in an interview, there's 2 people, the interviewer and the interviewee. So this is your answer. Now, intervene and interval just start with interv, but these mean completely different things. To intervene means to butt in or to sort of come in between 2 things. And an interval is like in mathematics, in a triangle, you have an interval, or a point between. So these 2 are completely irrelevant as well. Interviewee would be your answer. Now, question 3. Robert Doyle thinks he looks most resplendent in swimwear, casual attire, formal attire, or elastic-sided boots. Okay. Now, resplendent here might be a little bit of a trick because we might not know the meaning of that word. Okay. Now, the thing is, we don't actually need to know the meaning of this word because in this whole interview, there's only one question which is talking about how he thinks he looks, how Robert Doyle thinks he looks. And it's in this question over here. What do you look or feel really good in? And he says, not Speedos, blue suit, white shirt, striped tie. Okay, so based on the fact that this is the only question talking about how he thinks he looks, we can guess that resplendent over here just means really good. Okay, so what we can reword this question to be is Robert Doyle thinks he looks most good in is what? Okay, and we see from here, he says his answer is blue suit, white shirt, striped tie, which we would describe as formal attire. Okay, a whole suit is very formal attire. Now, question 4. Which of these words is a synonym for infuriating? If we remember, a synonym is a word that means the same thing as, in this case, the word infuriating. So we're looking for a word that's similar to this. Now, infuriating is used over here. How would someone you love describe you? And Robert Doyle says infuriating. Right? This comes from the word furious. So to make someone furious means you are infuriating, which is really just another word for annoying. Okay? So infuriating, annoying, they mean sort of the same thing. Now let's look at each of these options, see which one would be the best for a synonym for infuriating. Pacifying means very peaceful, very calming. So this one's sort of out, almost an opposite. Appeasing means they like you, that you're also very calming. Soothing also means calming. So aggravating is the only option that means something similar to annoying or infuriating. So this is a synonym for infuriating and is your answer. Now, moving on to the next text, which is a closed passage. So with these closed passages, quick reminder, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blank spaces in this text. And on the next slide, we have 7 options. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So one of them will be extra. Now, for each of these blank spaces, we need to pick between 4 options. And my advice to you is to read this whole text first, just skipping the blank spaces so you can get an idea of it. And then we can move on to the question. So again, I encourage you to pause it here and read this text. It's about warships and a fight between the French and the European side of a war in 1815. Okay. Now, question 5, which is the first one in this closed passage. Now, let's read around this blank space and see which of these options might work best. On June 1st, 1815, an attempt was made by the French to break the blockade of Europe imposed by the British Navy. Something something. A convoy of American grain ships escorted by a fleet of French warships attempted to penetrate the blockade and unload at the French port of Brest. Okay, now here's where we get a big clue about what's actually going to happen here. A convoy, which means a group, of American grain ships. Grain ships is our clue here. Okay, so what's happening here is there's the French on one side, there's the Europeans on the other side, right? And as it says here, the French, an attempt was made by the French to break the blockade of Europe. So here's a blockade, and these guys are trying to break in, right? So because a convoy of American grain ships are being, found, or they want to look for grain ships, your answer would actually be D. France under Napoleon had already conquered most of Europe but was short of food. Okay, so this option here gives us the best explanation for why they would need grain ships. Okay, so D is your answer for question 5. Now, question 6. Now, for question 6, we have the options B, D, E, and F, but D has already been used in the previous question, so it's between B, E, and F now. Okay, let's keep reading. So right after this convoy has been escorted, something is going to happen, and a great engagement ensued, which means a great fight. Okay, so we have a convoy, something in the middle, and then a fight. Now, let's see what we could slot in here. A convoy of American grain ships is being escorted. His name was Matthew Flinders. This makes no sense because we can't say a name for a convoy of ships. This is talking about a person. We're talking about a convoy here. So B is wrong. D is out already. Now, a convoy of American grain ships is being escorted. The convoy was intercepted, however, by the British fleet commanded by Admiral Howe. Okay, this one works because we're talking about the convoy of American grain ships still. So this could be our answer. Let's look at F. The Bellerophon too lived on to carry out at least one more famous voyage when she carried Napoleon. Okay, this is talking about the Bellerophon, which is another ship, and it's the title of this text, but we haven't actually introduced that ship at all yet. So this probably wouldn't be what we're talking about yet. So F isn't our answer. E is our answer for question 6. Now, question 7. Now we have a new paragraph here. One of the British warships participating in the battle was Bellerophon. Okay, now we're getting an introduction to this ship. Something something. The ship was in the thick of the battle for some hours, taking a bad battering. Okay, now because we're introducing Bellerophon and this is the title of the text, we can guess that the next line is also going to be talking about Bellerophon, giving some more detail about it. So let's try each of these options. Captain James Cranstoun became the new captain. Not related to the Bellerophon at all. One of the British ships participating in the battle was Bellerophon. His name was Matthew Flinders. Again, doesn't work at all. We're talking about a ship, and this is talking about a person. C. With 74 guns, Bellerophon, the flagship of the fleet, was possibly the finest warship afloat at the time. This looks beautiful so far because this is giving us an introduction, some more detail about the ship, so this could work. And G. In between bouts of destruction caused by French broadsides and the noise and chaos of the Bellerophon's own guns being fired as the battle raged back and forth. And then, well, this is the end of this option, but we have a full stop here. So this doesn't work. We need something else after this. We can't have a full stop because it's saying in between bouts of destruction. So in between these bouts, something else must be happening, but we need a full stop or something else at the end. So C is our only option that works here. Okay, works great as an introduction right after we've given the name of the ship, telling us it's the flagship of the fleet and was possibly the finest warship afloat at the time. So 7, your answer is C. Now, question 8. This is at the very end over here. On board Bellerophon at the time was a young officer, scarcely more than a boy, acting as aide-de-camp to the admiral. Captain James Cranstoun became the new captain, following repairs at the Portsmouth dockyard. This could work. Maybe. It's talking about a person, but it's talking about a new captain. So this person here, whoever this is scarcely more than a boy. So it probably won't be a new captain over here. So let's rule this out. On board Bellerophon, scarcely more than a boy, acting as aide-de-camp to the admiral. His name was Matthew Flinders. Okay. This works, right? Because this is giving us a name to the description that we have here. Possible. D we've already used. And F, the Bellerophon too lived on to carry out at least one more famous voyage. Again, this one is going into more detail about the ship, But here we're talking about some person, right, on board Bellerophon, not the actual ship. So A, your answer is B. His name was Matthew Flinders. No, because this is the only one really giving us a name to the description here. There was a young officer, scarcely more than a boy, acting as aide-de-camp to the admiral. So A, your answer is B. Okay, so right before this paragraph, we introduced the character of Matthew Flinders, and now we have a blank space and something Flinders does. Flinders was able to find time to jot down notes on the course of the battle for the admiral. So something here, and Flinders is doing something. Let's try the two options that we have left here, because we've already used B and C. F. The Bellerophon too lived on to carry out at least one more famous voyage when she carried Napoleon. Flinders was able to find time to jot down notes on the course of the battle for the admiral. Okay, now this works grammatically because we have something, then a comma, and then something else, but doesn't really make sense content-wise, right? What it's talking about here doesn't really make sense in terms of what we're talking about Flinders here. So let's try G now. In between bouts of destruction caused by French broadsides and the noise and chaos of the Bellerophon's own guns being fired as the battle raged back and forth, Flinders was able to find time to jot down notes on the course of the battle for the admiral. Okay, this works perfectly because previously we mentioned that we need something after this paragraph because we can't end it here. And now we have something after it. We have a comma, and in between these bouts of destruction, Flinders was able to find time to jot down notes. Okay, so it works perfectly. G is your answer here for question 9. Now, last question for this closed passage. We have this final paragraph over here. Okay, it's going to give as we read it, it gives us a brief overview of what happened at the end of this battle. How did it finish? What happened to the people in the fight and all that sort of stuff. So let's look at question 10. We have the options A and F because we've already used C and G. Let's read from the top. Flinders survived the Battle of the Glorious First, and at a later date, of course, became quite famous in a different way as a navigator and explorer, although still serving as an officer in the Royal Navy. Okay, so this is giving us some info about what happened to Flinders after this war. Okay, let's try these options. Captain James Cranstoun became the new captain following repairs at the Portsmouth Stockyard, from France to Portsmouth before he was transported as a prisoner to the island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, this might work, but it says Captain James Cranstoun is our subject here, and he would be transported as a prisoner. But we haven't really explained why this captain guy, who was assumably, he would, a big role in the fight, and he was a captain, he was leading the fight and all that sort of stuff. Now he's transported as a prisoner for some reason. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense that way. Let's try F now. The Bellerophon too lived on to carry out at least one more famous voyage when she carried Napoleon from France to Portsmouth before he was transported as a prisoner. Okay, this works perfectly. Okay, so we have a future for Flinders. Now we have what happened to the Bellerophon, the big ship, and it carried Napoleon from France to Portsmouth before he was transported as a prisoner. So Napoleon here is being transported as a prisoner, and this guy was one of the leaders in the war, so it makes sense that he was transported as a prisoner. So 10, your answer is F. And now we're finished with all these questions. So some key points to take away from this test. Really is just the method for closed passage questions. You have to read the text in its entirety, skip the blank spaces, read all the potential answers then, and then slot in each of those answers and start filling in them from the top. Okay, now we're finished with this.